Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Musgrove, joined as usual by John Gibson. It's time for another episode of Let's Talk About. And this week we're focusing on the players that Newcastle United should sell this summer in an ideal world. The names we'll bring to you are just the opinion of me and John, and we mean no disrespect to the players we mentioned. We just think that moving them on would be best for Newcastle United. And I also think, John, we should probably caveat our choices as well by saying that it's a lot easier said than done. We can't magic interest in these players out of nowhere. And the second thing is, it's getting pretty close to the start of the season,
Yeah,
and the window isn't open forever. So we're getting to the stage where it'll not be about selling those players. It'll be thinking about the replacement if you do indeed manage to get those players out the door, which might change the mind of you and me when it comes to certain names on the list. First and foremost, John, welcome back. How are we doing? You well?
I'm good. I'm excellent. Yourself?
Yeah, I can't complain. I don't know if you realised what happened last week in our last episode together. While you were talking and sharing your words of wisdom, I noticed that I lost my wedding ring, and
Good
there was a
gracious.
real fear came over my face, and I clipped the clip up and I put it out on social media, and everyone had a good laugh at it. Thankfully, I found it. It was in the car. I take it off for Monday Night Football to avoid ripping my fingers off when I'm the cat between the sticks. But everyone seemed to have a good laugh at it. You didn't realise, obviously, because you were too busy making whatever point you were making. But I just
I,
thought I'd alert you to it.
I bet Lily had a good laugh about that, Andrew. I don't think she would see the funny side of it.
No, she had a good laugh knowing that I'd found it. I think it would have been a different story had I not managed to stumble across it. But it's back on
Sure.
my finger here. This is going to be an interesting episode, isn't it, John? Because we'll have some people accusing us maybe of disrespecting some of the names we've got. Some people saying, "Oh, they're too important to sell." I think it's one that's going to really create debate. The first thing I want to ask you before we dive into any names is, did you expect more players to have been moved on at this point in the summer transfer window?
I expected more to be moved on and some to come in, Andrew. I mean, I know that it's not the end of the window, and people are saying keeping the powder dry, etc., all's good. It'll turn out in the wash. But in an ideal world, and believe you me, there isn't such a thing, especially in football, as an ideal world. In an ideal world, you can move people on and bring people in so that the people you bring in have time to bed with new teammates and with tactics and a new environment before the season opens. And of course, the season opens before the transfer window closes. Now, yes, it's better to get deals done in the last 24 hours, out and in, than not get them done at all. But it is much better to get them done early on. And we haven't done that. Traditionally, we often don't do that. Clubs like Aston Villa have done that. Now, have they stolen a march on us? Maybe. I would feel more comfortable if we got a couple of players out and got a couple in. But as you rightly said, with a lot of the players, we only want them out if somebody is waiting in the wings to come in. We can't afford to get somebody out and not replace at all.
And it's really interesting, isn't it, John? Because the season is on the horizon. You're 2 weeks away from the Premier League season kicking off. Southampton, the visitors at St James's Park. And I really would have thought we would have seen some exits by now. But the list that I've got, Wilson, Trippier, Miguel Almiron, I think are probably the top three on most people's list. And all talk of exits has gone very quiet. Are you surprised at that?
I am in a way, I'm not in another way. I'm intrigued by where Newcastle are in reality as opposed to publicly, because often it is two different things. I mean, you say, what are we doing in the transfer market? Who's going to go? Well, if you just went by what Eddie says, nobody's going to go. Because every time somebody's mentioned, he's supposed to have told Trips before Trips went on holiday, stroke interviews with Saudi clubs. He told them he's wanted at Newcastle and is due back on X date. Wilson, he's gone on record as saying he wants to keep. Almiron, he's gone on record as saying he's vital to the cause, etc. He didn't want to lose Maxi, he didn't want to lose Minter, and he didn't want to lose Anderson publicly. I mean, so what is the situation? I love Eddie to death, and I think he's been very, very cute. You know, you've got to you've got to think about if the player stays, you want him to feel wanted, not that you tried to sell him and couldn't. So publicly, you will say, "I love this guy; he's very important to us," and mean it. But we got ourselves into the mess we were in, Andrew, on June the 30th when we were scrambling round to sell Minter and Anderson. And Amanda Staveley's gone on record since saying how worried she was. The only person that's talked about that time is Amanda, who's gone on record and said that she was worried in that time that we might have to sell Alexander Isak or Anthony Gordon, who she says was being trailed by Liverpool. First recognition from the club on the record that was so. So this wasn't made up. This was the way it was. So we got into the mess we were in because in order to balance the books with this horrid financial fair play, you've got to sell as well as buy. We had not sold. The only meaningful sale, by that I mean that brings quite a return in, was Maxi, who Eddie didn't want to go. If we, in an ideal world, you see, in the old days, Andrew, in the days of not just Harvey, but in Bobby Robson and Kevin Keegan, the successful managers, in those days you didn't have to sell to buy because there was no financial fair play. If you could afford to buy somebody, you just did so. And whether you sold or not was irrelevant. It is not now irrelevant. And it is said that our kitty is £100 million as it stands. Now that buys just two players. First team players is 16 or 40. So there's no wiggle room on that figure unless we bring some more money in because of the restrictions that are placed on you. So we've got to sell somebody. Now, who is that somebody got to be? Yes, you can turn around and say, well, we'll sell Isaac Hayden because he's still with us, and we'll sell Ryan Fraser because he's still with us. But that's peanuts. That's not going to make any difference. You've got to sell a senior player. And I'm surprised that we haven't. Eddie is very loyal, and I know what he's thinking in some ways better the devil you know than the devil you don't know. And we know that the people that he wants to keep are good eggs. They will not just not rock the boat, but they will help in the group of players that help run the dressing room when we're talking of Trippier, Wilson, and Almiron. But somebody's got to go somewhere. And that is my concern is if we send nobody out, if we keep all our senior players, then we can get 1.5 good players in, and that's all. And will that be enough to have a go at the Champions League? Debatable. And I hope Eddie's right. I hope Eddie's been the diplomat and is saying the right things because everybody's wanted, aren't they? Every single quote from when Maxi went to now, he has individually said and gone on record as saying he wants Trippier to stay, he wants Wilson to stay, and wants Almiron to stay. In that case, who goes, Eddie? Somebody's got to go.
Yeah, I mean, people would say he's not going to throw anyone under the bus, and that's 100% correct. But he's also maybe hedging his bets and thinking, well, are we really going to be getting rid of Wilson, Trippier, and Miggy? It's probably at best now going to be one of three, not all three. And do you think, because we've spoken there, John, about the time scale to the new season kicking off and then the window closing as well, it's not too far in the future at all. Do you think that's now coming into the mind of maybe Paul Mitchell, Darren Eales, and Eddie Howe when they are looking at potential exits and they're going, well, we not only have to find interest in this person, but we also have to replace them. And with 6 weeks or a month to go, it's not going to be an easy task.
Well, with respect to the boys, and I must emphasise that I'm not having a go at them because the job Eddie Howe's done in Newcastle is nothing short of sensation. And the job that Paul Mitchell has done in the past at other clubs is equally impressive. So I'm not having a go at the boys, and they know what they're doing. But what surprises me, Andrew, this window hasn't just come upon us out of the blue. This window's always there, in the same window in January, in the same window next summer. Have we not planned for that in advance? Have we? I mean, when the window closes on September the 1st, it isn't the end of transfer negotiations behind the scenes. You can still set up things in terms for January, but we've gone halfway through this window and done next to nothing apart from bring Kelly in and 2 cover keepers. Now, it may well be that they've kept the powder dry. It may well be that they know they can do deals A, B, and C before the window closes, and good on them, and we'll wait and we'll keep faith. But we're bound to get a little bit worried because, as you say, the clock's ticking down, and to move people out and bring people in, every day that passes with nothing completed brings apprehension because we've got less and less time. And if we had to buy a centre forward, we've got to get Wilson out, unless it's a peanut centre forward, a young lad like we bought the centre half recently, and we might buy the kid from Sheffield United who will be no more than 20 million. That sort of wiggle room we would have. But we really have to move at least in an ideal world. Before the window opened, we could have got rid of Trippier, Wilson, and Almiron and brought people in, and it possibly ended up stronger. We have not time now to get rid of all 3 and bring in cover. We wouldn't need a cover right back because Livramento would fill in there. You would still have Kraft or whoever that could look to come in there as well. Almiron is expendable because you've got Murphy, and presumably are going to bring in an outside right before the window closes. But the Wilson one is really tricky. And here's another point: if you want, the window is rapidly coming to a close. What do you do about Callum? Because Callum is injured at the moment and is undergoing surgery. Now, how do you sell him before the end of August?
Yeah, it's a very tough task, isn't it? And Newcastle, I think, will end up keeping him. You said on last week's episode, you think he will stay, and I'm now coming round to that idea. If they do, they definitely need to go out and get a third striker. But again, it's the time. It's not on their side. And I know deals can happen in the blink of an eye. And we have to hope that behind closed doors, they're working on something, they're getting something close, and it'll not be too long until we see that next signing announced, just to give everyone a boost, but also to really improve the squad because it needs it if they're going to make a serious challenge for the top 4. Do you think, John, that the arrival of Paul Mitchell has had an impact? It's delayed things. Maybe there's been a change in direction, both in terms of the players coming in and obviously for this episode, the players going out.
Yeah, I mean it's had an impact because we didn't have anybody in place before Mitchell come along because Dan Ashworth was on gardening leave and nobody had taken up that role. So it's made an impact that way. But as far as the public's concerned, as far as the club's concerned, Paul's impact will be shown on September the 1st because his impact will be who's come through the door and who's left. That's how you make an impact in the job that Paul's in. And if that's putting pressure on him, football's pressure. There's pressure on Eddie, there's pressure on him, there's the pressure on Darren Eagles, etc., etc. That is what you sign up for. And the impact made by Paul will only be shown initially on September the 1st, and then in a year's time when he's had the January window and next summer's as well.
You just can't help but think where we would be if Dan Ashworth hadn't decided to go to Manchester United, or if Paul Mitchell had come in a couple of months before he did, and maybe we'd be sitting here with a couple of exits and a couple new faces in the doors.
Funny enough, Andrew, though, yeah, and I take that completely, and that is good theory. But funny enough, our most active period in the transfer market was immediately after the takeover when we had nobody. We just had Amanda and her husband. Just by Jove, they did very well with Bruno and Trips and with the help of Eddie, etc., etc. We did great then.
No, I agree with you 100%. And that we've seen, plenty of praise heaped on Amanda Staveley and Miedad Cadusi for what they did in that time, and of course throughout their tenure at Newcastle United. But with their exits, Dan Ashworth go, maybe it's just becoming a little bit more streamlined, and unfortunately Newcastle are maybe paying the price. And it's probably something that was totally out of their hands, you would think, but paying the price for not being able to get a sporting director in to replace Dan Ashworth a little bit sooner. But he is here now, hopefully getting his feet under the table. He's gone to Japan with the squad as well. So him and Eddie Howe don't have to worry about the time differences and missing each other's phone calls. They'll be in the same room. Do you think that's going to have an impact on the window? What's left of, that they are
Yes, yeah.
there
That's why
together?
Paul Mitchell's gone. I mean, yes, he's a hands-on guy. Yes, he likes standing on the touchline during training from time to time and be seen within the club as opposed to an invisible figure. But the reason he went to Germany, the reason he's gone to Japan, is that the window's open, but it's slowly closing. So we can't have the manager in Germany and Japan and the other guy that's intricate to the whole system of buying and selling is at base in Newcastle. We've got to have them together to have any push to get anything through the door. And I mean, I will reiterate again, I'm not panicking yet, but I am at a situation where I'm anxious because I want us to be competitive this coming season. And it's going to be a tough season because you know that Manchester City and Arsenal are going to set the pace at the top. You know that Liverpool, unless the dramatic change in manager has really done their end in, are going to be having a real bash of it. Manchester United, for all the chaos, Chelsea, for all the chaos, you can't rule out having a go. Aston Villa, we hope that the extra thing of being in the Champions League will be too great a burden and we might be able to cash in on that. But they're going to have a go. It's going to be a scramble. And if there's only 2 Champions League places out of 4 going to be available, maybe 3 if we've got 5 into the Champions League. But you would think that Arsenal and Man City are nailed on for the Champions League because they're going to fight out the title. So it's going to be tight. We've got to get off to a flyer, and that means the deadline for the start of the season, which is not the transfer deadline, Andrew, but it's off close. That's even closer, isn't it? Eddie in an ideal world went on record that he wanted 2 players in before he went to Japan. That hasn't happened. So he wants 2 in. No doubt his next target is 2 in before the kickoff. Will that happen? And then it's 2 in before the transfer deadline closes. And as we've said, because this is about people going out, we've got to get some out to get. We've only got 100 million only. But I mean, these days it is only. So we possibly couldn't buy 3 players without somebody going out, i.e., an outside right, centre half, and a centre forward. So we need wiggle room. We need people to leave, as well as people to come.
Yeah, and it's more than just raising funds, isn't it, to add to that transfer kitty? It's about creating space in the squad because he's only going to be able to name a 25-man squad. He's taken 29 to Japan now. Some of them are youngsters, so they won't necessarily take up a space in that Premier League squad. But he has got more senior pros than he has space in the squad. And look, we're not going to count the likes of Isaac Hayden because he hasn't got a future at Newcastle United. But still, if he's wanting to bring in 2 or 3 new faces, then the likes of Trippier, Miguel Almiron, maybe Sean Longstaff are the ones that are going to have to be sacrificed to be sold, because you're not going to want them just to not be in the squad and sit on the touchline and be in training all week, but then be unhappy because they're not being able to be picked every week. You will want to sell them because they'll want to play first team football. So it's he's got a dilemma when it comes to picking his squad as well, and that's even before you talk about new rivals.
Sure. I mean, if we take that squad in Japan, Andrew, there's 5 goalkeepers in it, for goodness sake. I mean, that's why Dubrovka's got to go, because there's 5 goalkeepers in that squad that's gone to Japan, because Dubrovka's added to the 4 that's going to be with us for the new season. So, Dubrovka's not going to bring in enough money to be wiggle room to make a significant difference on what we can get in. But nonetheless, he's a senior pro who we've got to respect immensely for what he has done for this club, because let us not forget, let us not have short memories. When we needed people, he stood up and was counted and was North East Player of the Year, Newcastle United Player of the Year, back in the Ashley Bruce days, etc., etc. So he's got to be hugely respected, but he's also got to be moved out. And there's a difference, Andrew. If I sit here and say I think Trippier should go and Wilson should go and Almiron should go and Dubrovka should go, that doesn't mean I'm not grateful for what those 4 have done for Newcastle, because they've been fabulous. They have been absolutely fabulous for Newcastle. But everybody has a shelf life in football. I ran Gateshead for 11 years. And I'm not suggesting that's anything like running Newcastle United, because my ego doesn't carry me that far. That would be totally ludicrous. But the same rules apply at a much shorter level. I had to get people into the office as chairman of Gateshead, players, because I might overrule the manager on very, very, very occasionally. And I had to get players in and suggest why and tell them why I was letting them go. And these are people that had served me terrifically. It is hard, but it's also called business. And if you haven't got the backbone for it, don't join the game. You've got to be hard. You've got to go to people like Callum Wilson and say, you have been terrific for this club. You've scored 48 goals. You've given absolutely everything, your quality. But I'm sorry, I'm going to have to let you go, and I'm going to tell you why. You're the wrong side of 30 and the wrong side of an injury crisis. And I'll tell you one thing, we will not sign a better goal scorer than Wilson, but we will sign a more reliable centre forward than Wilson. Wilson, when fit, is as good a goal scorer as you can get, second in the pecking order here to Isaac, but he would get goals as much as Isaac if he was fit regularly. He's not. That is a fact of life. It is not Newcastle United's fault, and it really isn't Callum's fault. But you're not shown disrespect if you treat them with the utmost respect. We are talking in Trippier, Wilson, Almiron, and Dubrovka, because they're the ones we've mentioned, about 4 people who I will always, as a Geordie, be eternally grateful for what they've done. But at the same time, as a Geordie, I would say thank you very much and move them out. Not all of them in the next 3 weeks. That's going to be an impossibility. But what you've got to do, Andrew, is say these are available and then see who comes for them, because somebody's not going to come for all of them. You've got to say these are available. I would sell these if I get a good offer, and then you take it from there.
And do you think Eddie Howe has got that ability to be brutal? I think he does, but a lot of people do question whether he's got that in his nature. I think he's not a man that you want to mess with behind that closed door. When the cameras aren't rolling, I think he's got a right bite about him. But some people do question whether he's got that cutthroat nature to move the players on that maybe he necessarily doesn't want to.
Yes, I think he can be ruthless, and I think he is ruthless behind closed doors. My slight concern about him in the transfer market, and you're making a very good point that the fans make, that they sort of say, is he ruthless enough? Is he too loyal to players, etc., etc.? I think it's ever so slightly different. He looks at Trippier, Wilson, and Almiron, for example, and he knows what they'll give him. Loyalty to 110%, if that was possible, behind Eddie Howe and the cause and the team, will not cause any waves whatsoever. You can put Lascelles in that category. You could put Richie and Dummett last season in that category. And therefore, better the devil you know than the devil you don't know, i.e. Ryan Fraser. And his attitude to the club, and that was very, very different. And And therefore, I think he is genuinely reluctant to get rid of these. In the old days under Robson and Keegan, it would be very easy to keep Trippier, Wilson, and Almiron as long as they wished to stay and buy in other people, because you didn't have. You had to balance the books, but only in terms of the guy that was sitting upstairs, not in terms of financial fair play. And you get the impression that Trippier, Wilson, and Almiron would be happy to stay. Maybe Trippier and Wilson would be content to go as well, but they would be happy to stay. But that is not quite the point. We can't afford everybody to stay, and I hope that Eddie's been clever in saying how vital these people are to the club, and it is clever management, and he is a clever manager, that he's saying that because he's thinking, if September the 1st, Almiron's still in this club. He heard me say halfway through the window, publicly in front of everybody, I want this fella to stay. He's an important part of our setup. So he's still with us. If he gets the idea that he's getting pushed out the door and then Newcastle can't find the buyer, it's very difficult for the rest of the season to make him feel that he hasn't got a chip on his shoulder. I'm not wanted here. I hope he's being clever, and I think he is being clever. But I also think there's a bit of truth in that as well. He doesn't want to He didn't want to sacrifice, at least publicly, he said, Anderson and Minter. But he had to sacrifice somebody, and you've got to sacrifice somebody now. Now, for me, there's only four great untouchables at Newcastle United. We're talking about moving people out. And that's what I call our four blue chip players, which is Isak, Gordon, Bruno, and Joe Linton. They're untouchable to me. Outside of those, if a big offer come for anybody, you've almost got to consider it and let them go. I'm putting people in that situation like Longstaff, like Willock, like Harvey Barnes, because I'm not wanting to sell those. I hasten to add, but would you prefer either Longstaff, Willock, or Harvey Barnes to go, or would you be happy for Isak, Gordon, or Bruno to go? You've got to choose, and the bottom man says you don't want any of them to go. Um, and the bottom answer for me, I don't want um, Longstaff, Willock, and Harvey Barnes to go. I would rather it be Trippier, Wilson, and Almiron, because I think they're more expendable to the squad than the other three are.
Well, we've got some questions sent in via email, and you guys can get in touch. The email address is theeibwpodcast@reachplc.com. Do send your questions in for any of the shows that we do. We always love hearing from you. And one of the questions, John, that came in was from, let me just find it. It was from Michael, and he emails in to say, "Hi, John. Thanks for the podcast. I want to ask you whether you would not only keep Sean Longstaff for the next season, but also offer him a new long-term deal. He's a very good squad player to help with that depth that is needed, in my opinion."
I can follow what Michael's saying. I can follow other fans that are saying something that I just said, which is if somebody's got to go, it's a new world, isn't it? And we don't necessarily like it, where somebody we feel for might have to be sacrificed. I mean, Elliot Anderson sat very uncomfortably with me in going, very, very uncomfortable, because I think he's a bright young boy, he's a local boy, he cares like Billy O about the club, and he's got a huge future. But as I said, somebody had to go. And my Jove, I shudder with the thought that it could have been Gordon or Isak. And that's tough. I think that Longstaff is a good squad player. I think Willock is potentially an outstanding midfield player. And I think Barnes is potentially, we've never seen him yet in any great length of time. And I think he's a terrific player, but sometimes somebody's got to go. I mean, whoever goes now and whoever we bring in before the end of the transfer window, we've got to hope, Andrew, for a quicker positive response than we have got from Hall and Barnes and Tonali, who have all been here 12 months and have cost us £119 million, and for reasons, some of which has been beyond their control, like Tonali with his betting ban. I know that he was guilty of betting to start with, but the actual ban, and Barnes with his injury. But we have spent £119 million on three players who 12 months later, because Hall was on loan for 12 months, so he could have knocked those out the windows in that 12 months. Only now we've paid the 28. But we spent 119 million and had very, very little return for that so far. I'm optimistic that all three this coming season will give us a return. But so far it hasn't. And if we were going to spend £119 million now, we want a return immediately, don't we?
No, we do indeed. And I mean, just on Michael's question, would you extend Longstaff's stay? His contract is up in the next summer. Would you give him a long-term deal? If I guess it all comes down to how he performs this season, where
I was going to say, and you can't, yes, you can't leave it until virtually the end of the season because he can have taken advantage of all sorts of things by then. But I wouldn't give him it yet. But I would keep him in start and see how he goes in the first few months of the season, and if he produces anything like his form, give him a realistic contract. Not such a rise where he's a big time jolly because that's got to be earned, but a realistic contract. But I tell you what, before I start worrying about Longstaff's contract, I'm more worried about Isaac's contract than Gordon's contract.
yeah, you want to see them tied down to
Oh,
protect
do I?
Newcastle's position when it comes to
Absolutely.
potential buyers coming after them. But also, John, there are a host of players out of contract next summer, which is going to force Newcastle's hand, maybe in the remaining weeks of this window, or if not, then in January. You've got Fabian Schär, Dan Burn, you've got Jamal Lascelles, Kieran Trippier, Callum Wilson, Emil Kraft, Sean Longstaff, as we've mentioned, and we'll chuck in Jamal Lewis there and Martin Dubravka just because their deals are up. That's a lot of players out of contract. I think Joe White's another one who hopefully can overcome whatever injury he's got and prove himself, as a valuable part of Eddie Howe's squad. I'm sure he would have been in Japan if it wasn't for that injury. But that's a lot of names, a lot of senior players, John, who,
Yes, and
it
Andrew,
just need to be sorted.
this is why it is this. We are bad sellers. That sounds ridiculous because you're only bothered about being good buyers, but we are bad sellers. We don't sell people in cash in. People that I call just beneath the elite level, the people that we should get rid of. And that is why, Andrew, we have got to sell before this window closes. And we've got to sell people like Trippier and Wilson. I've told you why it's going to be difficult with Wilson. We all know how do you sell somebody that's in a hospital bed or something, having an operation. But we've got to, because Trippier and Wilson, not only at the end of the season do they go on free transfers, but Trippier is 34 in September, and Wilson will be 32, 33 by the end of next season. We've got to, if we don't sell them now, we don't sell them. Because did they want to go in January when they command a fee? Trippier or Wilson, I mean, because if they wait another couple of months on a free transfer, and effectively the transfer fee goes to them as a signing on fee, so you're not going to get them to leave in January. If we are going to get any money for the likes of Trippier and Wilson, it's got to be done now.
Yeah, and look, the list that we've got of players who, in an ideal world, would go in the next few weeks includes Wilson and Trippier, Dubravka, Almiron. So we'll talk about those in a moment. But the other names on that list, John, I mean, Fabian Schär is an interesting one. At the moment of speaking, first choice for Newcastle United. Yes, they might go out and get another right-sided centre-back to rival him, potentially push him out of the team. But as of now, you can see him starting the season and hopefully continuing the great run of form he's had under Eddie Howe. What has he got to do to get a new deal? Do you foresee him leaving next summer on a free, or would you, again, cash in this summer if it was possible? What does the future hold for Fabian Schär?
I would gamble with Fabian Schär. I would try to sell people like Trips and Wilson now so that he gets something in before they're free. But Fabian Schär has earned the right. And you could say Trips and Wilson can earn the right, but he's earned the right by keeping a huge standard, a high standard of form. He was the outsider for Player of the Year last season. Yes, it was going to be Isaac or Gordon, wasn't it? Because Isaac got 25 and Gordon was sensational. But Shaw wasn't far away, and we haven't got. We keep saying we'll buy a centre half and we'll buy an outside right. We haven't yet. And how many days are left? And how many days have gone? So let's trip. Shaw is absolutely essential to this club. He starts against Southampton as things stand. And even if you have a new centre half and he didn't start, he will play a lot of games next season. He is essential. Don't even dream of cashing in on him at this stage. He is essential to the cause. There's plenty of others that can go before Shaw.
I agree with you. And it's interesting because you look at that list, Dan Burn out of contract next summer. You can't even dream of selling Dan Burn this summer. A, because of how important Eddie Howe sees him to his squad, but also because defensively you start stripping away the likes of Sher and Burn when you've got injuries to Lascelles and Sven Botman, then you're really going to be lacking that depth at the back. And Newcastle have already got enough issues with depth, in other areas of the pitch. You can't cash in on Jamal Lascelles because he's injured. Kraft, again, is one of those players that adds to the squad depth. We've spoken about Sean Longstaff. I mean, look, Jamal Lewis is someone that you'd like to cash in on, but his loan deal at Watford didn't go to plan last season. How much money are you really going to get for him? It goes back to what you said there about Newcastle and their lack of ability to really trade players. And we've actually got a question here from Peter, who lives in Gateshead, and he has emailed in and says, Darren Eales and others have got on record to say that the club in previous years have not been very good at player trading. This summer seems to follow suit. How does that change?
Well, that's a great question. It's got to change in attitude, and we don't know what the real attitude is. We know what Eddie's public stance is, and I think it is a deliberate public stance that has stood him in good stead throughout his managerial career. I'm loyal to players. I'm good to players. Players can trust me. I want them to stay. And he means he wants them to stay. He never said he wanted Ryan Fraser to stay. He means it when he says it. And it's covering him because if they end up being with us, they're still staying loyal to him. They don't feel he was a traitor to them. But I hope behind the scenes he's more flexible than he is in the public eye because we cannot hold, if we hold on to all these, we are dead in the water, mate. We are dead. And what's more, it's not clever business because in a year's time, Trippier and Wilson are worth nothing. If we get 12 million for Wilson now, and he's not fit, so would we? And we got the same for Trippier, just plucking figures out the air. That's 24 million we can have now, or nothing we can have next summer. So you sell. They're on the wrong end of 30 as well, and you've already got Trippier's replacement in-house.
Yeah, indeed. And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we're talking about an ideal world, but as we said right at the start, we can't magic up interest in Wilson's injury, which is going to see him miss the start of the season. I'm willing to bet that it's probably going to be more than that Southampton game he's going to be out for.
Absolutely, it'll be more than that. Yeah.
Just removes
I've almost washed my hands on the Wilson situation, Andrew, because for me, the straw that broke the camel's back is when Callum, who I love as a player, and if you go back on the record and you would say it, I once said to you, this fella has all the potential to be a number 9 legend at Newcastle United. The one thing that's going to stop him being that is his injuries, and I stick by that. His ability, he could be a number 9 legend. His injuries, he'll never be a number 9 legend. And sadly, he'll never be reliable. And when the guy is sent home from Germany, and he didn't even kick a ball in the friendly in Germany, and he's got to see a surgeon, and he missed the end of last season. I mean, what's the hope? What's the hope? Bless him. I mean, he wants to keep going. He wants to keep. I mean, it was only with about 4 or 5 games to go at the end of last season. He was talking about still making the Euros with England. You can't make the start of the following season now. I mean, it is. I mean, it is not harsh. It is truthful to say that is unreliable. And if he's unreliable, we've got one centre forward. He's up. Now, is that a way to go into a competition whereby we want to get in the Champions League and or win one of the domestic cups with one centre forward in your squad?
It's not, is it? But the very
Yeah.
fact we're talking about him being unreliable, we're talking about him having another injury. It's not the best sales pitch to a
Well,
potential
it's
suitor.
no sales pitch. It's no sales pitch whatsoever. That is the huge, huge worry. And does that make it more important that we sell Almiron and Trippier if we can?
Yeah, because they'd be more
Because they
likely
can go.
as to take him. Now, and we'll talk about Kieran Trippier. He's come back from the Euros, jetted out on holiday, spotted in Dubai. He posted on Instagram that he was there, and his post did rile a few Newcastle United fans up. And understandably, it was a caption that said "good meeting." It was with the head scout of a Saudi Arabian team, the one that's managed by Steven Gerrard, and obviously everyone jumped to one conclusion, and that was that he's gone and he's rubbing Newcastle United fans' faces in it. We don't know the full reason behind that. Was he being a little bit cheeky? Was he sending a message out? Now Eddie Howe's been asked about it. He's played that down, and he said that he's looking forward to having Kieran Trippier back after his break. He said it was just a kind of a personal thing. They're just friends. That's all it was. There was nothing more than that. Wasn't the best move by Kieran Trippier, whatever his reasons behind that post was. I don't think it was the sensible thing to do. Do you foresee him stopping this summer, John? Is he the first one out the door, do you think?
As you said at the beginning of this conversation, you've got to be wanted, Andrew. It's all right us saying, right, we'll get rid of A, B, C, and D, and then we'll bring in E, F, and G. But somebody's got to want these players. Somebody's got to want Wilson when he's permanently injured. Somebody's got to want Trips when he's 34 in September. And he hasn't had a good 2024, despite playing for England in the Euros. His form's tapered. And somebody's got to pay the right sort of figure for Almiron. And that's before you ask Miggy if he wants to go to whoever wants him. It is not as straight. And you're dealing with people's lives. I mean, Miggy, you're saying, right, go to Saudi and live in Saudi for 3 years. Well, maybe you don't want to. Maybe you don't want your family to live in that sort of climate. I'm talking about the heat and everything. You're dealing with people's lives, so you've got to think about that as well. And the difficulty is, it's easy for me to say I would sell Trippier, Wilson, Almiron, which I would, but I've got to find somebody that wants to buy them. And that is almost an impossibility in Wilson's situation at the moment. But you've got to try to do it with Trippier and Almiron. But what I'm trying to say to you, Andrew, that what are we doing going round scratching now for somebody to buy them? We could have spent all this year since the January window closed, the rest of the year, setting up these deals for the summer. We can still tout players out of the transfer window privately to other clubs and say, have you got interest when the window opens again? That's called business in football.
You can do, but I do wonder how many things stay private anymore in the world of football. Could you imagine, you go February and you say, right, we're going to sell Trippier in the summer. You go and knock on the door of a certain club and say, are you interested? I don't think that takes very long to get back to the agent and the player. And then you risk potentially, rocking the boat even further. Then you've got an unhappy player. You're trying to sell me behind my back, etc., etc. I think that's a little bit of a risk.
Andrew, it happens all the
No,
time.
I
It
don't
happens
doubt it, but I think is
every
it
waking hour. It happens every waking hour. I used to do it at Gateshead level. So what it happens at Premier League level, I mean, it doesn't always get out like the Liverpool one with Gordon got out. That's quite unusual for it to get out. And often clubs, Trips and Callum, they were considering moving in January. So you're not going to ruffle their feathers. Do you think between January and now they haven't thought about moving in the summer as we have thought about moving them on in the summer? I mean, they seriously considered going in January. They were open to staying and open to going. And it's called football. That is the way it is. And a lot of players will look on the plus side. They'll say, oh, well, Kieran or Callum, I'm leaving Newcastle. I love Newcastle to bits. I've had such a wonderful time there. And then they wake up the next day and think, well, I'm on the wrong side of 30. It's going to be my last payday. I'm going to make a fortune because I'm going to Saudi or somewhere where there's a lot of money, etc., etc. So it's not the worst thing in the world. People leave. Matt Ritchie and Paul Dummett didn't want to leave, but they did. Maxie didn't want to necessarily leave, but they do. You're in the business of coming and going. How many people stay for 10, 12, 15 years? How many people are one club men like Jack Milburn was and people like that? That doesn't happen in football these days. You've got to be prepared in a short life to move about. And, it would be very naive to say, I mean, if you're going to worry about walking the boat, then you walk the boat every time you pin a sheet up on a Saturday lunchtime with 11 names on it because the rest of the first team squad are pretty dischuffed because their name's not on it. If you're going to be, timid Timothy, then don't be in football. You've got to be brave as long as you're honest and upright and be as honest as you can be with players when approached. And you can't be 100% because your loyalty is to the club. But you've got to be able to be brave. If you're not brave, this isn't the world for you.
No, I get what you're saying. I do understand what you're saying. We're looking at Miguel Almiron. You've mentioned there. Is he really going to move to the Middle East? He clearly thinks he can still offer something in the Premier League and a big league in Europe. The more we speak, John, the more I do. A part of me wonders whether we might actually get to at least Southampton, and not a single one of these players have been moved on. Not a Miggy, not a Trippier, not a Wilson because he's not going to pass a medical. Maybe Martin Dubravka, he could go out and find a club, maybe a Celtic. I mean, Arsenal have been linked, but he's not going to go anywhere and find first team football, I don't think.
No,
But in terms of the big three that everyone has at the top of the list, I think in terms of cashing in, Wilson, Trippier, Miggy, I'm looking at it and thinking, are we even going to get to maybe the end of the window and no one's put money on the table for them?
Well, if you look at the start of the season, what are we? A couple of weeks away.
Yeah.
That's all. I mean, are we going to move somebody out before then? Are we going to move them out before the end of the window, as you say? I mean, we could theoretically start the season with the squad we have now, today, as we speak. And that would be awful. I mean, in my book, that would be awful because we'll have the business this summer then will be one free transfer, Lloyd Kelly, who I think will be a very, very good player, as long as he can remain fit. And how many times have we said that about a Newcastle United player? Two cover goalkeepers, not first choice, two cover goalkeepers. And Lewis Hall, a bloke who's already been here 12 months. So, we haven't spent a meaningful penny in the transfer market yet. And nobody of consequence went out. Yes, Almiron, Wilson, and Trippier are the three big hitters. Dubrovka's got to go for his sake. We've got 5 goalkeepers in Japan, for goodness sake. That's half a team. 5 people, that's half a team we've got of goalkeepers. We've got Jamal Lewis, who's got to go because he hasn't a future here. Hayden hasn't had a future here for seasons, but we've got to get him off the payroll. Ryan Fraser, we've got to get him off to Southampton because he's no good to man a beast up here. And the bloke we haven't mentioned, because we forget that he even exists, is Target, who, if he was fit, we've got to get out the club as well because he's just not at all involved. So there's plenty of people that can be moved on, but who wants them? And, are we pushing forcibly to move them on? I hope we are. I honestly hope we are because we've got to get somebody out. And as you pointed out, because there's a lot of people coming, like Byrne and Longstaff, who in a year's time their contracts are up and we're running risks with them in Shaw. But we're running that risk with Trippier and Wilson. Are we going to get some money in for these guys, or we're just going to get them out on a free transfer in a year's time?
Well, this is the other question: is do you think Newcastle United might find themselves in a position, John, where they have to accept less than they originally wanted? So we were talking about Miguel Almiron back in January, getting somewhere close to 30 million for him, but maybe now given how long is left, maybe clubs think Newcastle are a little bit more desperate than they actually are. But they appear desperate to sell. Maybe you might have to accept 20 million for Miguel Almiron, and then you get down to Wilson. A fit Wilson, even with a year left on his contract, probably fetches you in the region of 20 million. But we know his injury record. Someone comes in with a cheeky 10, 12 million pound bid. Same with Trippier. Are Newcastle United going to have to face a scenario where they go, maybe that's the best price we get? Yes, it's 3 or 4 million under what we wanted. Maybe it's even 10 million under what we think we could get. But this is a situation we face because we're going to lose them on a free next summer.
Exactly. If you're going to get 12 million for Trippier this summer, you're going to get nothing from next summer. So you sell him this summer and play Livramento. That is the easiest one of all these things we're talking about. The next easiest one's Almiron, and yes, take what you can get, push it as far as you can get. Nothing silly with Miggy, but push it as far as you can get. Wilson, I'm exasperated. I just don't know what to say because you can't sell Wilson. Effectively, it's impossible to sell Wilson this transfer window.
It's interesting with the Trippier one because me and Aaron had a debate yesterday on the Monday show where I said, look, someone comes in with 10 million for Trippier, I'm selling, I'm cashing in. Thanks for being the man who started it all, but your time has now come to go. And Aaron wasn't having it, mainly because of the depth of the squad. He didn't want to have Newcastle United facing the possibility of having Livramento at right back with some concerns over his fitness record, then the backup of Emil Kraft and Harrison Ashby. Aaron wasn't happy with that. But for me, I think you've got to deal with the reality of the situation. We keep saying the words ideal world, but this is far from an ideal world, because if it was an ideal world, you'd have cashed in on some of these players already. You'd got fair market value for them and you would have replaced them already. That's not the way it works. The way I look at it, John, is that every penny counts. Newcastle United, if they can get some cash for Kieran Trippier, you sell him. I think you have enough at right back to get you through to next summer, which then you go and buy another right back to rival Tino Livramento. Maybe Kraft goes on a free, maybe he gets a new deal, but you go out next summer and you buy a competitor for Tino Livramento. Is it ideal? No, but you don't sell Kieran Trippier and then replace him, because that's going to take money, wages away from the other priority positions, a right winger, a centre back, and a striker. There's so many things turning. You have to make a compromise somewhere.
Absolutely.
I think it's at right back.
It's called business. We've got to do that. And I mean, we could make a case out for not selling anybody. And you know what? I think that's been our trouble in the past. We have made that case out. I don't mean us. I'm talking about Newcastle United. We have made that case out. We've sold nobody of any consequence. And you can't do that. I mean, you could once upon a time, but with financial fair play, you can't do that. And the simple answer is, in a year's time, Trippier will leave this club. He'll leave on a free transfer. In a year's time, Callum Wilson will leave this club. He'll leave on a free transfer. So are we going to get some money in and get at least something? And because neither are first teamers, by the way. I know Trippier is in theory, he's deputy skipper, and he is in theory because he's also played for England. But you've got Livramento. You've got to let somebody go anyway. You can make a case out for not letting Longstaff go. You can make a case out for not letting Willett go. You can make a case out for not letting anybody go. But if we don't let people go, our wiggle room is nil, by the way. So we've got to get real. We've got to not avoid tough decisions. We've got to front them up willingly and sort them out and get on with it, because that's what progressive clubs do. Aston Villa aren't faffing about. They've sold a couple of their top players and brought a couple of other people in, and they're saying, let's go. Now, they could fall flat on their face. But we could not sell anybody and not buy anybody and fall flat on our face next season. The fact, if we leave the status quo, it doesn't automatically say, well, we're pretty good, we'll be all right next season. We could finish seventh again. We've got to shake up the balls.
Well, to finish off, John, I'm going to run through some names and I want you to give your honest opinion. This is not what Eddie Howe does. This is I want what you think is going to happen, because we know with Eddie Howe, you and you just don't know what's going to happen.
Of
But
course.
I want your opinion on, first off, Callum Wilson. Will he be a Newcastle United player come the end of the window?
Yes, simply because he's injured.
Kieran
No.
Trippier.
No.
He'll be gone. Miguel Almiron.
Ought to be gone, but you've got to find somebody to put the money down.
That sounds like we might have to reopen the Miguel Almiron fan club next season.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. If you open it, you've got to join it, and I don't know that you've resigned yet.
No, I have resigned. I closed it down after that horrendous dive against Brighton, and I never expected to even be saying the words we'd have to reopen it. But do you know, I've got a little suspicion, well, big suspicion that he's going to be here. And I think maybe January we might see him moved on. I just don't know if there's the takers this summer for him. I really don't. And hopefully, you know, if he does stay, and I know it's not going to be a popular one, and I think if he does stay, I don't rule out them going out and buying a right winger and Almiron being the second choice and being maybe the one off the bench. I can see that happening. But hopefully he can prove everyone wrong and you know, grab a few more goals than he did last season. Sean Longstaff, end of this transfer window, still a Newcastle player?
I think he'd be here, but I think he will still be here. But if somebody puts down good money for him, good money by his standards, I would sell. I mean, I would prefer to sell on Almiron, Wilson, and Trippier, but we're not going to. If nobody comes in for them, but somebody comes in for Longstaff, I would sell.
What's good money? Have you got a price range? What would good money be?
If somebody come in with 20 million, you would snatch a hand off.
Especially with him being out of contract next summer.
Yeah.
Got Matt Target, still a Newcastle player.
Let him go.
Martin Dubravka.
For whatever you can get.
Martin Dubravka.
Must go for whatever you can get. We don't need 5 goalkeepers. And
then I'm not going to mention Jamal Lewis, Isaac Hayden, because we all know what should happen there. I mean, like I've said, I wouldn't, but I will do. Jamal Lewis, is he getting another chance to show himself, or is it because Eddie Howe simply hasn't got a left back to play in these preseason friendlies?
You've just hit the nail on the head. He isn't getting a chance to show himself at all. He's yesterday's news. Not quite as much as Isaac Hayden, but enough. And we haven't mentioned the person we don't mention, which is you sell Ryan Fraser for, I don't know, for 2 balloons and a goldfish to Southampton.
Yeah, we haven't spoken about him at all, and for good reason. And hopefully he does get that move to Southampton sooner rather than later. Well, John, thank you very much as always for popping on to the podcast. You guys watching and listening, thank you for joining us. Do leave us a rating and review on the audio channel. We always love hearing your feedback. If you're watching on YouTube, give the video a thumbs up and hit subscribe. Just do it right now. Because it helps us get the videos out to a wider audience and helps us keep doing this for free and bringing you the best Newcastle United content we like to think around. So thank you as always to John, and we'll see you guys next week.